Welcome to the Unapologetic Heroine podcast, where myth is made manifest. As the author of The Way of Inanna, a heroine's guide to living unapologetically, this podcast is based on Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love and war who embodies multidimensionality and lives unapologetically true to her heart. We showcase the wisdom of individuals courageous enough to do the same. These are inspiring stories of what it takes to be authentically who you are. My guests honor the wisdom of love, embrace the polarities of being human, and walk their truth. I am your host, Seana Zelazo, licensed psychotherapist, intuitive channel, and author of the book, The Way of Inanna. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hello and welcome. Today, I am thrilled to bring you someone for whom I have the deepest respect. Dr. Nathan Riley is an ally for the divine feminine, devoting his life's work to the health and well-being, empowerment, and sovereignty of women. He is a stellar example of the sacred masculine. Like Inanna herself, as well as all the guests I have the pleasure of interviewing on the show, Dr. Riley is wondrously multidimensional. His list of epitaphs is extensive. Specializing in rites of passage, he is an OBGYN who helps bring souls into the world at birth, and also he is a hospice and palliative doctor who guides people through their transition out of this world. But Dr. Riley is also a way shower for living harmoniously and in alignment with one's inner knowing. Trained in holistic lifestyle medicine, Dr. Riley helps patients develop an autonomous relationship with their bodies so they can live the sovereignty he teaches. He also has a hugely successful podcast called the Holistic OBGYN, which features wisdom teaching about everything from birth, death, and spirituality to living in balance. In 2021, Dr. Riley left traditional medicine when he realized the confines of the Western medical industrial complex didn't allow him to be present in his practice in the ways he feels are essential. This unapologetic move led to Dr. Riley becoming the founder of Beloved Holistics, a private contract association with the mission to foster autonomy in the birth experience by empowering and honoring the intuitive nature of the birthing miracle. He is currently studying anthroposophic medicine, which is an integrative, multimodal approach to healing. He is an Ironman athlete, does CrossFit, Olympic weightlifting, and rock climbing. In other words, Dr. Riley is fully embodied, practicing the very reverence for one's own body that he teaches others. Welcome, Nathan. Thank you so much for being here today.
Wow. Seana, that was a heck of an intro. Thank you for that. I might have to steal that and put that on my website. Holy smokes. What an honor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Really, truly, our understanding of Inanna is that she is a teacher of liberation and freedom. Yeah. And that is very much like you, Nathan. As the goddess of love and war, she fights for what she believes in. Even while doing so, she understands that her process includes healing and reconciling her fears. She is the epitome of a spiritual warrior, willingly facing her death while simultaneously embodying faith in herself. As a self-described recovering conventional doctor, you two are both a visionary and a spiritual warrior who fights for and defends women's rights to autonomy and informed decisions. As an OBGYN, you're changing women's healthcare by putting the power back in the hands of the patient. And it's clear that you have faith in yourself to support a systemic change. Before we delve more into Inanna, I want to ask you about your decision to leave conventional medicine and how it enabled you to re-examine what it means to live authentically and honor and defend your individual truth. Can you tell us why this move was so important to you?
Oh, yeah. At this point, I've been asked this question so many times, and I've tried to fluff up my answer in such a way that people find me more bearable, because it is so confronting that somebody that would go through 14 years of education and training and then years thereafter of experience would turn back and be like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not going to do it that way. It's very confronting to people because I think a lot of people within, quote, the system of medicine feel the same way, but they haven't had either the courage or the sort of self-reflection period to determine that they actually can get out and do something else. So instead of fluffing up my language, I'll be very, very deliberate with my words. If we don't change the way that we care for women, our society is going to fall apart. And if we want to see any change in the world, whether it's exclusivity around sexuality or sexual orientation, or it's to be less racist, or we want to save the environment, save the planet, if anything like that is going to ever be possible, we need to first reflect on why we can't get birth right. We're over intervening, we're over medicalizing, we're over pathologizing one of the most sacred things that a human being can go through. And a part of that is because we have a toxic masculine approach to virtually everything in the world, which could be summed up as, what's the problem and how do I solve it? So when I started my training and I was really in depth with birth, I realized this is sexless, this is godless, there's a complete void here that could be filled with a deeply spiritual connection to one another, to our kids, to our partners, to the earth itself. And that was what was lacking in medicine. It was a reductive, sterile approach to a sacred rite of passage that I could not shake. There's no amount of cognitive dissonance that could have kept me doing it that way, especially when I had a partner of my own and we were going to have kids. How would I want to show up for her? And if it was the way that I was trained to be a doctor in the maternity care system, it was going to leave my wife and I broken. So why would I be showing up for my patients like that? Or not even patients, because if you're pregnant, you don't have a disease. You're not a patient. You're a client, if anything. So how can we show up for women when we have a system that has deemed itself the caretaker of that system? And that's where I think a greater connection to who we are, this inner reflection period that happens in pregnancy, the honoring of the divine feminine's ability to produce a baby through a portal known as the yoni, to be able to honor that in a system that is constantly disturbing and overhauling it. That's really where I thought my career was going to have to change. And that's exactly what I do now, is to bring spirit back into the human experience through the lens of allopathic medicine.
Well, that is exactly why I see you as unapologetic and why I wanted to have you on this show, because that's the kind of energy that we need to affect change. And undoubtedly, the crucial work that you do would have been considered heretical in the past.
Oh, yeah, I would have been torched on the stake,
right? Absolutely. And you detail a lot of that information in your episode 72. Of your podcast, The Holistic OBGYN. And in it, you offer a historical overview entitled A Briefish History of Western Medicine, Witches, and Women Healers. How does one come to overcome the stigma of being labeled literally or figuratively a heretic?
Yeah, well, I feel like women are sort of taking back the term witch, and I caution them to do that because, don't call yourself a witch. That wasn't a term that women used to call themselves. That was what the male priest or judge and the male self-proclaimed physician were calling you. It was a label that they would apply to you as you were being tried for witchcraft. And somebody who looked like me would sit there next to a judge or a priest, it could be either, a vicar, and the physician would literally say, this sounds like medicine or this sounds like witchcraft. And if the physician said it sounded like witchcraft because you had some herbal tinctures or something in your house and somebody said, witch, the doctor, the self-proclaimed doctor, would say, that sounds like witchcraft. And that was all that it would take for a woman to be burned at the stake. While meanwhile, the male, maybe her husband, who also has 2 little girls, I'm painting the picture of myself, would have to watch as this woman got burned to death and can't say anything, can't intervene because heaven forbid somebody accuses him or his little girls of being a witch. This period of the witch hunts from the roughly 14th to 17th centuries, especially in Western Europe, but it really spread it had quite a diaspora of these practices through the lens of the Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches. Women and children were being hunted and killed, slaughtered. So to adopt this term witch diminishes just how atrocious this period of time was in the middle to high Middle Ages. So when I use the word heretic, I actually think that's probably more appropriate, although it still is sort of adopting a term that nobody in their right mind would have utilized. No woman back then, especially women, would have said, yeah, I'm a witch. come and get me. It was a
Mm-hmm.
term that was applied to them by the church and state. So I call myself, I've been called the tattooed heretic of birth and death, because the way that I speak is very, very, very confronting to a medical industrial complex that adopted, through the lens of people like Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes, the reduction of the human experience to only the measurable facets, which, by the way, back in the day was actually very important. If we didn't separate soul and spirit from the body, or let's say soul and mind from, to understand the cardiovascular system, the visceral organs, etc. So it was good that we were able to separate those two things from the lens of these great philosophers. But at the same time, we've doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on the fact that what you see in front of you, those measurable facets, are the only thing that matters, which is a complete divorcing from the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects that make you human and give you this magical power as a woman and as a husband to, or not necessarily, wife, husband, but to the male and female duo that creates a zygote that grows into a baby. It divorces all of these other attributes of what makes being alive and being human so special. You're not the sum of parts. You're far greater than things. Yes, it's confronting. We can't bill for conversations around, conscious conception, or, mental and emotional stressors, or trauma that is stored from poorly integrated stress when you were strapped down for a C-section. We can't conceive of those things because there's no way of fitting that into this reduced medical industrial complex, sort of perverted model of caring for people. So your question was really about me adopting this type of lens, and I don't blame anybody for not adopting this viewpoint, because through cognitive dissonance and those golden handcuffs, being in the system with $400,000 in debt, I get it, and I really want to see change in the world. I genuinely believe that we need to figure out what we're doing here, because we're going downhill fast. So it's a hill I'm willing to die on, I suppose.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. Absolutely. And I know secretly, I really hope you turn episode 72 into a book, Nathan, because there's so much in there that is so powerful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It'll be a part of a book someday for sure.
Great.
I'm actually working, it's on the back burner right now, but I'm working on a book that will educate OBGYN residents or anybody who's interested in women's health. Like, this is what the missing, appendix of every textbook you've ever read about, the practice of obstetrics or gynecology, going way back to ancient Sumer, which of course is where we meet Inanna and Ishtar, or Inanna/Ishtar.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I can't wait for it to come out.
Yeah.
In all your spare time, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Reclaiming our power. That's right. Who needs sleep? Absolutely. Reclaiming our power is something Inanna also teaches us. And there seems to be a strong parallel between what you and she offer. And like you, Inanna straddles the two worlds of life and death. And undoubtedly, you have witnessed so much magic in that space. How has working within the sacred sphere of these rites of passage altered, if at all, the way you live and the way you guide others to live it?
Well, if you're asking about specifically how does death, how has it colored my experience as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a doctor? If that's the question, I don't know if I have a great answer. I think that, so when I was in OBGYN residency, I had kept this nugget of experience tucked away in my back pocket from when I was in medical school. My father had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma while I was studying for the medical college admissions test, also known as the MCAT, back in college. And my now wife and I had gone to Korea to teach English. And while I was there, I decided, hey, after this year of teaching, I got to go to med school. I went back. My dad was even sicker. And, after 3 to 4 years of being in treatment, I don't think he'd ever really explored his emotional sort of conditioning as to how he was being so confronted by mortality. And he's a rough and gruff Rust Belt laboring guy, HVAC, company, worked on airplanes and in the Navy. And I wasn't going to talk about how scared he was or how he felt necessarily. But then he met a palliative care team at UPMC in my hometown of Pittsburgh, which is where I happen to be right now. And he met their palliative care team and somebody named Bob Arnold. He's a physician. He's one of like the grandfathers of contemporary palliative medicine. And he started opening up to this guy, Bob Arnold. And I was like, well, gosh, that's pretty impressive communication style, doc. And I wasn't yet a med student. I wasn't yet through that process. But as I saw this relationship evolve, and my father eventually passed away when I was in the middle of medical school, it occurred to me that like, wow, this is a pretty confronting thing, this death concept. And, in your mid-20s, you don't think much of it. But now you see your father wither away to the point where you can carry him in your arms. And he used to be like this towering figure to you. So, man, this must be very confronting. And then fast forward, you end up in birth and you're like, gosh, this is very confronting. People don't talk about birth, and then they may not even know what birth is like until they're in the midst of having these surges, these powerful functional surges, which, yes, they're very painful, but they're also moving your baby closer and closer through this portal into the earth school. Like, gosh, these are some serious things to be confronted with at the end of life, or at the beginning of life, or perhaps the birth of a baby is the end of something and the death of a human is the beginning of something. Like, my mind just started going in all these different directions. And by the way, I was raised in a largely, I would say, I don't really know if the term agnostic applies, but it was really, I don't think that there's too much going on beyond what we can actually feel and see around us, But then as I started going through my own father's death and having some animistic experiences in the woods, and then of course sitting with so much birth and residency, it occurred to me, what if I could take those communication skills that Bob Arnold used with my father? What if I could apply that to birth? How then would this experience for a woman be a little bit less confronting? And it's never going to be easy. There's no easy way around birth. That's why it's a rite of passage. An initiation can't be a true initiation unless death is on the line. It's just the way it goes. So, a lot of these other sacred rites of passage culturally around the world put you into a place where you feel like you might die. And then right at that point where you're starting to lose faith in this process, bam, you pass through some, I won't use any direct language, but you'll pass through some portal on the other side of which you're going to say, oh my God, that was really hard and scary, but now I've emerged anew due to the pressures, the oppressive cosmic forces of whatever it is that I just went through. And I saw birth and death the same here. If I could apply that language of palliative care to birth, I could be the best obstetrician on the planet. And that's really, I think, why I decided to do hospice and palliative care. Now, the final thing I'll say about that, because I feel like I'm getting long-winded, is that when you sit with so much death, and I tell people I've sat with at least 1,000 births, at least 1,000 deaths. Do I know how many exactly? No, because I think there are more important things than counting your chips, so to speak. But I've sat with quite a bit of it. And when you're paying attention to it, it doesn't make it less scary, but it does tell you that there's synergy. You could say that that you can see spirit leaving the body. You can try to use words in whatever way you want, but the experience of being in birth and in death is truly ineffable, meaning there's really no words in our language to describe it. And I'll add to that as one final thing, that even though I've sat with so much birth or so much death, I do not feel less afraid of those. It's not a matter of wiping away the fear. It's a matter of trying to contextualize the importance and privilege that these two rites of passage offer us in life. And so when I'm on my deathbed, I hope to not be afraid and to be tantruming about not having enough time. I hope that that's the case, but it's no less scary to be stepping through a portal as it is with any other rite of passage.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing about your father, because that certainly sounds to me like your own initiatory experience. And how powerful, because your capacity to be fully present with your patients as a result of witnessing all of that is exactly what we need. And to your point, that presence it's just, in my own experience with end of life work, that presence is invaluable. It's hard, right? So to be able to have experienced it yourself, it it is its own, if you will, training. And it's hard to articulate, to be present. It's a beautiful idea, but to actually be able to put it into practice is really powerful. So it feels very much like your father initiated you into that and taught you exactly how to do it. So beautiful.
Totally.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it really speaks to the notion of, the birth and death aspect that really shows up in Inanna's mythology as well. Certainly her own initiation, is it's this rebirth or ascension that occurs. But it's interesting too that her mythology really emphasizes, certainly the descent of Inanna emphasizes that she was turned into a corpse and hung as a piece of meat on a nail on the wall. It's such it's a graphic image. And yet it really, it's like her mythology highlights that detail with great emphasis. And it struck me in that it was sort of like, okay, so look at this now, practice being present in the face of this intense visual. So I see Inanna definitely as a teacher of ascension, but also a teacher of the death mysteries. So one of the reasons why I wanted to connect with you, because you have this experience in both of these realms. And there are also so many other ways wherein I see a connection with her, that she really is an embodied goddess, fully embodied. She insists on and prioritizes her physicality. And as a competitive athlete, you have likely experienced the way the body can help us achieve flow and alignment. As a former endurance athlete myself, I know there's something about the training, the worship, the reverence and honoring of the body, as well as the ritual of training and the ceremony of competition that shares something with the spiritual path. How has sport, if at all, served to help concretize your desire to teach an empowered relationship with the body?
Wow, that's nobody's ever asked me that question. And I really, really love that you did. Like, you're now you're my new best friend. I've gotten so many questions over the years through interviews and whatnot, and nobody's ever asked me that, because I don't know if people really appreciate that. So I'll tell you a brief story. Do you know of Paul Chek and the Chek Institute?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So how familiar are you with their teachings?
A little bit. Not fully.
Just a little, like, you kind of get the point, sort of.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Paul Chek and Angie Chek, I met them because I was on call for another doc when I was in San Diego, and they called me and needed a doctor because their midwife, they were planning to have a home birth. The midwife had found she had high blood pressures. I went to meet them. Long story short, I was their birth attendant, and I became good friends with them. Well, I was invited to Paul's office. And, Paul, if you're listening and you want to know Paul's, get a feeling for him, go to his podcast, Living 40 with Paul Chek. He's one of the most extraordinary and interesting people I've ever met. And his wife, Angie, is no less, nor his other wife, Penny. I mean, that tells you enough about their family right there. But I'll try to summarize this, because there was something that happened with him. And this was this was about 7 years after I stopped training in the Ironman distance triathlon stuff. He invited me up to his house, and we blew some tobacco vapor. We painted. He did give me 5-MeO DMT. It was just one of those days where you just keep saying yes, and the day just gets more and more and more interesting. And this guy started with a sort of in the powerlifting, heavy lifting exercise kind of flow. And then he's slowly grappled with consciousness and God and love. And so he kind of fits the whole bill. Well, while we were meeting, I was starting to understand this guy a little bit better. And we went to lift giant rocks in his garden to stack them on top of one another to make a cairn. And as I was stacking them, he was complimenting me on my, your nervous system is really well tuned, I think is what he said. And I had to really be thoughtful about that. Like, what does he actually mean by that? And when a person moves their body through a strenuous thing, it is going to tax them. It's going to tax their muscles. It's going to tax their mind, their heart, their vessels, their adrenals. You have to get a surge of energy to lift a big, heavy rock. And if you do it quickly while you're stacking, I mean, these are up to, some of them are 300, 400 pounds. I was lifting the 250-pound rocks on top of other 250-pound rocks, which is a heck of a lift I'm not a very big guy, but I'm very strong because of all this body awareness stuff I've done throughout my life. And as you're lifting a rock like that, you can't rush it. It's not like throwing a ball as far as you can, or running as fast as you can on the treadmill. It's really, and those require their own body awareness. But in order for you to lift a giant stone, move your body through a compound movement, place it on top of another stone, get it to balance, and then to get another stone that's slightly smaller, maybe the same size, and put it on top of that. The exercise of lifting stones and placing them on top of other stones requires a nervous system that is super in balance, because you can't rush it, you can't panic, and you can't be totally sluggish and chill either. There's this coordination of so many different muscles. And in order to do that well, you have to go slowly, but you also have to develop a practice of becoming aware of where your left hand is relative to your right foot. Where is, these other rock stacks? Where are you in space? And that whole experience is something that many people, I think, are poorly or sorely lacking. You shouldn't feel bad if you can't lift big stones, but the point being that there isn't a lot of opportunities in our life where we're not just on autopilot. And a good example of how I think this is applicable to my work in birth and how I use this story is that how many women nowadays are looking forward to going to the hospital to have their induction of their baby. Whether it's needed or not is not the question, but they're going to be sitting there. They're going to get an epidural as soon as possible. They're going to, which doesn't provide necessarily analgesia. It provides anesthesia, meaning you are no longer able to feel your body. It's not just blocking the pain signal. So the rite of passage in childbirth is by necessity kind of hard. It's just not a very easy thing to do. And without the body awareness piece, you could just have a baby perhaps come out, or maybe labor gets stalled because you aren't feeling how this baby is rotating inside of your pelvis. And when a woman doesn't have medication and she's left undisturbed, she oftentimes is in every position possible, generally not on her back. And when the baby comes, she'll be in a run, she'll go on the floor, she'll be leaning forward on her bed, she'll be doing all these different things. And the women who have the most autonomy in their birth, generally speaking, are people who have developed some degree of nervous system stability and proprioceptive body awareness. So even though I've never had a baby, I've watched so many women have undisturbed births. And if you disturb them and get them into a position that doesn't make sense, they're going to bite your hand off. And that's because they know, they can feel it. They are in tune with what they're. I guess the closest thing that a man can do, in order to experience that is something like rock stacking, or going into like a traditional Lakota sweat lodge, which I actually just had the privilege of doing. It was designed by the women of the Lakota Nation to mimic the experience of giving birth for the men in the tribe. So you get into this very tight, very low hanging tent that's sealed off from the light, and you sit in there for 5 rounds of maybe 5 minutes at a time, and you get so hot that you have to be, paying attention to wiggling your toes, keeping air moving in and out, keep attention to your pulse. How do I feel? Where am I? Am I grounded? Is there a pocket of cold air up here? You have to be extremely aware. You can't just go in and just cruise through it. So these types of initiatory experiences, whether it's through athleticism, I do think that really, it helps to optimize, or especially in birth. This is a big part of what I do with my fertility and pregnant clients is we need to not be building muscle necessarily. We need to make you aware of your body. You need to get you have to reconnect with the physicality, with the lioness inside, and remember just how capable you are. But many of us don't ever have that. We're not really offered that opportunity throughout life unless we pursue something like Ironman distance triathlon or heavy weightlifting, or swimming is a great one. Rock climbing was a great one for me as well. So that's a long answer, but it was a good question. So I had to come up with a really good answer.
I love your answer so much. And it really also, it speaks to how sport is really a path to personal growth. And it's very, very powerful. But that awareness too, that you're describing of that body awareness is so central to what you teach, even with respect to connection with the second chakra, that your work is so second chakra focused. And what's intriguing to me about that, yeah, it's so beautiful for so many reasons, but that being the creative center too is sort of like, I read it as your own emphasis on reminding us of our own creative capacity, that you're sort of like highlighting to the world. We're all creators here, and let's create consciously. And I love that. And I know that your wife is an artist. And I wondered if living with a creative being helped influence or bring your focus into the creative center of the second chakra, or just even in general, your emphasis on creativity.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I don't think that it would have made sense to anybody that I was going to be a doctor, because doctors are not critical thinkers. They haven't exercised their critical thinking for maybe a decade or 2 decades, or maybe for their entire career. The reason I say that is that when you go into school, you're expected to answer the question produced, a question that is provided by an examiner, and you have to guess what the examiner wants you to answer correctly. If it's a math problem, there's no 2 + 2 = 4. Fine. But if it's a question about what's the best way to have a baby or something, they've answered for years now. They've answered based on what they think the examiner wants them to say. So there's no critical thought required. It's very left brain dominant. I have always been a very right brain dominant individual. So while I got good grades in school, I was the guy who was doodling, who was making funny noises, who wanted to if the class project was make a video promoting an advertisement video, I went above and beyond because I just wanted to just find some creative way to express it. I was a colorful dresser. I was a little bit on the eccentric side, and I played multiple instruments when I was younger. But then as you get through school, you're rewarded from high school with college, and you're rewarded, if you do well in college, with admission to med school. If you do well in med school, you're rewarded with additional training residency. And then if you do well in residency, you can go further for fellowship like I did in palliative care. That whole time, there's not a lot of creative license. Again, you are being weeded out based on your ability to follow rules. So when we say, well, why can't they see this other stuff? Because they've never been incentivized to. They have only been incentivized to answer questions at a higher rate of correctness than their colleagues. So it was never a matter of a creative writing class weeded out the better doctors, or how compassionately can you talk to somebody about cancer diagnosis. That was never a part of the grade. That was an afterthought that hey, maybe we should actually train people that are emotionally available and able to tap into empathy, etc. Now we have to train people in bedside manner. So what we have is an entire workforce of people who are very very left brain thinkers, and I've been right brain my entire life. So naturally, I have almost been expelled from every program I've started from the very beginning. And the only reason I wasn't expelled is because I was still getting the right answers on the test. But because I was asking questions and wondering, what if we did it this way? And maybe we should try education instead. It was like, why can't you just do it the way we want you to do it? And my reflection has always been, well, it doesn't seem like it's the only way to do it, or I think we can improve on it in this way or that. But that requires somebody to be able to look outside of the box. It also means that I'm not great at memorizing this specific, percentage, risk of this or the dosage of that. I have to look it up because my brain doesn't really work like that. But with a supercomputer in my hands at all times, that's the easy part. Medicine, once you understand the pathophysiology and the mechanism of action of your pharmaceuticals, you don't need to necessarily be able to look it up. In surgery, you know the anatomy, do your surgery, and I'm very good with my hands. So they never had a reason to kick me out. They were just sort of like, this guy doesn't fit in here. He's always trying to find a novel solution to something. And naturally, where I find myself now is those creative juices have really helped also get me out of the system. And, looking back, my wife and I are both very creative types. She's definitely somebody who utilizes a lot of art and likes to say, hey, I can probably make that out of macrame, and figures it out. And now we have this beautiful plant holder, up on the ceiling. That is not routinely encouraged or incentivized in a society that values productivity over everything. If you're not making money for somebody, then you're not valuable. And so by since we're talking about the second chakra, that is not only the center for your reproductive health, but getting that second chakra moving is also relies on you expressing yourself creatively, whether it's singing again, dancing again, painting again. I get all of my fertility clients painting. They may have never painted anything in their life, but now they've got a blank white canvas, a dark paint and a light paint and a couple paintbrushes, and they're going to create a masterpiece. This is really where I'd like to see medicine going, is that we need to re-embrace our childlike desire to create good art. And we can't do that in a system, as in a medical education system, that only values how many right answers you get on a multiple choice test.
I love that answer so much for so many reasons. I always feel the answer resides in art because it just is really just what you're saying. You can strengthen that center by engaging in art, by expressing your creativity. I love that that's part of what you teach your patients to do or your clients to do. And it's really also connected in many ways to intuition. And because I'm such a big fan of your podcast, I know how much value you place on intuition and our connection with the higher realms, and how we can creatively express our connection with the higher realms. It's so refreshing.
Yeah.
You recently shared your personal exploration of tarot, which on social media, and that's one of my favorite tools. And one of the reasons I love it so much is the power that the art has, as with the codes and the symbols therein, to act as a doorway to spirit.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about your interest in tarot.
Well, I honestly can't say much about it. I've only very recently myself endeavored to understand it, and this goes again back to my friend Paul Chek, who, like I said, he started off as a physical therapist. He had all these incredible, this expertise working with professional athletes and high-level performers, getting their bodies fixed again. But then he started exploring the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of what keep us healthy, which help us have babies and everything else. And so when we met, I started becoming aware that, looking outside of the bounds of the merely physical is really critical. And this guy seems to have language to describe it. So if I could, show you some little voice memos I've recorded of our conversations over the years, it's all about God and consciousness and love. And he has this incredible library, never even finished high school, but has this library of about 10,000 books with annotated notebooks attached and cross-referencing all of them. I mean, it's incredible how this guy works as a synthesizer of complex information. As we've had these conversations, I've really started to try to learn from somebody who can synthesize complex things very similarly to the way that you do, Seana. And in drawing from, Inanna, this history from ancient Sumer. But then he, most recently, he said, I want you to take my tarot course. I think it'd be really great for you. And I was like, tarot? Like, what? Why would I want to know tarot? And then I heard him describe exactly what tarot is useful for, which is really connecting to your inner self, which your higher self is really a reflection of God. And I'm not talking about the Christian God. I'm talking about God's source spirit, the creator. Call it what you will. But when you sit with birth and death, you can't not believe that there's something greater if you're paying attention. And so in connecting with my higher self, being able to tune into my spirit, my soul, my intuition, my solar plexus, this chi, this prana that's coursing through me, to then have somebody synthesize that into the operation manual, so to speak, of a tarot deck. And we're talking about the Rider-Waite, like the classic tarot deck. That is, for me, that is another tool for me to be able to provide somebody a completely different lens to view all of the other stuff that I teach from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual levels. Let's give them another way to view this, because not everybody learns the same. Anybody out there who says their program is the best program for X, Y, or Z is full of it, because everybody's coming at you from a different angle. So tarot for me was a way of putting in a more visual, kind of mysterious packaging, a conduit through which I think a client or a friend or family or even myself can connect to their higher self, which provides us with some additional insight that they're not going to get from a book, from this podcast. They're not going to get it necessarily anywhere else. This is a direct connection to something that's a little bit less measurable, less tangible. So I am very, very new into my tarot studies, but already having started on that path, I'm captivated by it. I'm very, very captivated. It's a very interesting new thing for me.
Oh, wonderful. I hope I have used it for that's about 27 years or so now. And I couldn't agree more in the ways in which it is a bridge to our higher self. And I use it for myself. That's really, even though I do readings as part of my work, I don't do tarot readings. I use the tarot as my sacred tool. So thank you for sharing about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And just before we come to a close, I would love to just ask you and highlight the fact that you're studying anthroposophic medicine. And I would just love to ask you what pulled you in that direction for now, for 2022, and why it is so important for you now.
Well, anthroposophic medicine, which for those who aren't familiar, it stems from the body of work of Rudolf Steiner, the 19th into the 20th century. We'll call him a spiritual scientist. That's probably what he would prefer to be called. But this was a high-level scientist who presented, I believe he started channeling, call it what you will, channeling, gathering information and insights from beyond, and then compiling it into a rapid succession of lectures, about 6,000 lectures over maybe the course of a decade, on everything from childhood development and education to agricultural methods, which of course you could be up as biodynamic farming, and the educational piece is Waldorf education and child development. And then there was also a group of people, nurses and doctors alike, who he was speaking to about medicine and through a very different lens. Rudolf Steiner developed with Ida Wegman in the early 20th century anthroposophic medicine, which instead of looking at just the measurable facets of being human, which is your lab values, the imaging, the physical exam, all important, he also folded in, again, some of these mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects, which in his fourfold model of the human, you have the mineral physical, you have the mental, the etheric. The third would be the emotional or astral. And then the fourth would be the spiritual or the I. That's the ego, that's consciousness, etc. All four of these factors have an equal role in understanding the health of a human. And as I started, this past couple of years very hard for most people, and I've become so frustrated with the medical system because of its cavalier nature of recommending something as simple, which I thought was so simple as a vaccine, in such a cavalier way, using a new technology, even to pregnant women, where meanwhile, my colleagues as OBGYNs are shaming women for having sex and orgasms in pregnancy. Now they're coercing them to get injected with something that these clients of mine are reasonably a little concerned about. When I started seeing that happening, I was like, God, I don't know if I can really keep banging my head on this wall. And I didn't. I just stepped away from that conversation. I'm not going to be the dirty 13 or whatever. I'm not going to go that path because it's not that important to me, and it takes away from the work I can do. But imagine just being so lonely. I don't have any colleagues that really see eye to eye on me. I had a home birth. I am the heretic. I am this Looney Tune out here promoting home birth and low intervention birth and conscious conception, and using functional labs and Dutch testing to help women get their periods back on track, and using Chinese herbalism and referring them to people who interpret dreams or communicate with the spirits of babies. I'm already that guy. And it feels very lonely not having another physician colleague who feels the way I do. And while I've got a couple, it wasn't until I started reading Rudolf Steiner's work and realizing, oh my gosh, there are other people out there that are thoughtful about this, that want to use more natural salutogenic approaches to getting a person back on track in their health. And as you study anthroposophic medicine, you realize how much more optimistic it is. There's less blaming, there's less guilt, there's less shame, there's less hard line, here's what you have to do. It's all a matter of finding what it is that you, my client, you're lacking to harmonize with your environment, whether at the physical, the mental, emotional, or spiritual level, or in Rudolf Steiner's language, the physical, etheric, astral, and I. And that to me was just it was such a breath of fresh air. Like, what a relief. I don't have to know everything. I can actually be curious again. And that's it's exactly what anthroposophic medicine is all about. For those who are interested, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of getting to know people, which I already do anyways because of my end of life and birth work, helping women, talk about their birth traumas and whatnot. We can do a biographical look at your entire life and identify where traumas arose early in your life, and now what's happening, the mirror image side of that life, U-shaped life, biographical timeline, and then we can use really gentle remedies to help solidify either the physical, the etheric, the astral, or the eye, in order to modify or liver disease or kidney disease. You're really helping to nudge the body back onto the path towards vitality, as opposed to forcing it to do that through surgery and synthetic hormones or otherwise synthetic pharmaceuticals. So it was really, for me, it was like, okay, great. There's a little light at the end of the tunnel here. I feel optimistic now again about being a doctor. And this doesn't replace Western medicine. This is a complement to Western medicine. So it really is providing me with a truly integrative approach to human health, specifically the health of women or couples who are struggling with fertility.
Well, first of all, that is incredibly fascinating. And I so wish I had known you when I was pregnant with my child. There just seems like no other way I would ever want to experience medical care than just exactly what you described.
Yeah. And I mean, for people who are not ready to understand anthroposophy, they find every reason in the world to discredit Rudolf Steiner, that he was anti-Semitic and everything else. Like, there's no way to understand a lick of what that guy was talking about unless you're really dedicating to the study of it. You're not going to listen to a podcast and know everything there was to know about a guy who wrote 6,000 lectures and presented it to distinct bodies of people without having much notes, like a couple words on a piece of paper, and just speaking for an hour straight about something that is so abstract, but is so easily integrated once you really start to feel your way into it. So it's not an easy thing to do, yet when you meet an anthroposophic doctor, you like you can understand that this is a person who has thought more deeply about what makes you human compared to your dog, compared to the flowers in your garden, compared to a rock. They've probably studied plants more than anybody that you've ever known. They have a better appreciation for how parts of the plant can be used to make medicines. And they have an understanding of those subtle energetic things that make you feel like you, that we otherwise can't explain within the medical system. It is a perfect complement to allopathic medicine. So for anybody out there looking for an anthroposophic doc, if you're curious, just Google it, go to the Physician Association for Anthroposophic Medicine, and you will find yourself one of the most, what's the word? I don't want to say talented, but the most curious doctors that is coming at you with some of the highest levels of compassion that you will probably be ever experience. This is really, really something.
I can not agree more. This is exactly what medicine needs and what we need to reclaim our connection with ourselves, because it really feels like it emphasizes intuition. I'm so grateful,
Totally.
Nathan. I am truly grateful for your time and your willingness. And thank you for helping to bring balance by reclaiming the divine feminine, for being an embodiment of the sacred masculine, and teaching about the importance of restoring the deep connection we're meant to have with our second chakra and feminine power. Can you tell us where we can find you, work with you, and experience your teachings?
Yeah. Seana, it has been a huge pleasure to be in conversation with you this morning. I just want to acknowledge that the type of work that you're doing, and we didn't even get to talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and Inanna and Ishtar and all of that, but I know that through your work, you are spreading a more, I think a more integrated way of looking at things. And if people aren't willing to open up their minds to something new, a different way of approaching this, then we're just going to remain lost in the woods. So I do want to also just take a moment to acknowledge you and your listeners, this beautiful book that you've written. If people out there listening haven't bought it, please go and buy this book. It's not the typical self-help book. And I really just appreciate the way you ask questions and the way that you try to get sort of beyond the superficial layers of the onion. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
For people that want to find me and work with me, my practice is getting very busy, but I'm still accepting clients. And there are two ways that I generally work with people. The first is one-on-one. I become a part of your care team. The other way is that if you're a midwife, a birth worker, a childbirth educator, any type of doctor whatsoever who wants somebody like me as a regular consultant, maybe you need somebody to sign off on orders if you're a midwife in certain states, or you're a doctor, naturopathic doctor that just wants a doc who has some pretty comprehensive functional medicine training and understanding of holistic, and lifestyle medicine to review things and help you care for your clients. That's my collaborator program. So both of those options are available at my website, which is belovedholistics.com. I have a private contract association, as you mentioned in the intro, meaning you have to make an annual donation, similarly to like the way you pay a membership fee at Costco. Once you pay that annual donation, which helps keep my back end up and running, you get access to all of my services, including the things I already mentioned. I am also going to be launching a premium fertility program. When I was in ceremony with some sacramental medicine, we'll say, I had asked, what is the purpose of the heart? And the answer that came to me was patience, reverence, and presence. And so the name of my fertility program is exactly that. We have to get you back in touch with your body, connect you to your heart, to the heart of your partner, to the spirit of this baby. And that's all going to be offered through the PRP fertility program, which I'll be launching in the next couple of weeks. It includes everything from biogeometry, mitigation devices, to a couple books, to functional labs and Dutch testing, to consultation with me and 6 other renowned experts in the field of fertility. It is going to be hands down the best investment you can make, way before you even go down the path of IVF and IUI and all that stuff. So I'll also mention I am currently working with Indie Birth, Marion Green of Indie Birth. We are putting together we have a proposal out there now. We're in the fundraising phase of opening up a birth and death retreat space, which will be called the Indie Birth Sanctuary for Sacred Life. You can find more information about that at indiebirth.org or birthsanctuary.org. And or it's Indie Birth. Just go to indiebirth.org and you'll see it there. I can't remember the new other website. And then lastly, I've got a podcast where we have conversations like this. And Seana, you're going to be a guest in the new year. I hope you'll accept that invitation. But if not, no harm.
Oh my goodness, I'd be so grateful.
I think it'd be lovely to have that as an extension of my podcast 72. But yeah, my podcast is called The Holistic OBGYN and is far less clinical. It's far more integrative, very much like our conversation has been today. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your audience. It is a true joy.
Thank you so much. And I will make sure to have all of those links in the show notes. And finally, to our listeners, thank you for sharing this sacred time with us. May you experience fulfillment on every level and in all directions of time with great ease and joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Unapologetic Heroine podcast, featuring remarkable individuals living their truth. For more wisdom on how to support your own journey toward honoring your heart and courageously alchemizing our world through the power of love, pick up my book, The Way of Inanna, A Heroine's Guide to Living Unapologetically, at booksellers worldwide.